Okay, well, good evening. I know on the billing it has me as a correspondent or senior correspondent for Channel 4 News. I have retired, or semi-retired, actually, because I'm still doing one or two things for them, because I still miss the world, but I've retired, sort of moved to Edinburgh. But I've known Theo for 7 years, and he reminded me that he sent me an email 7 months ago, which I must have forgotten about because I wasn't, for whatever reason. And then sent him a reminder, and I've known Theo over 7 years, and I've chaired a number of his conferences. This, by far, really, to me, brings almost everything together, as he has said in the in his talk. This is the third book launch in probably 6 weeks, where I've come down to London to chair, and all of them have been about race and justice. One was a former Metropolitan Police Superintendent, Paul Wilson, who's written a book called Rocking the Boat, in which he describes his life in the Metropolitan Police and how he fought for fairness and equality on behalf of black officers, well, black and Asian officers. Then there was Lee Lawrence, who has won the Costa Prize, autobiography prize, for his book about trying to get justice for his mother, who was shot and crippled by police. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was 1994, but I may be wrong about it caused the second riots in Brixton. She survived for 16 years after she was shot, but as a paraplegic in a wheelchair. And Lee Lawrence was in her bedroom when the police came in looking for someone else, and he saw his mother shot. And it is another very compelling, very, very compelling book. So I'm very delighted to be here tonight. I have no idea, we will all have to fly by the seat of our pants, because I have no idea how this will be structured in any way at all. But it would be good, and for those online, I can't see you, but you can hear me and see me. I'm interested in trying to make people engage in what Theo has addressed tonight, in a way redefining, to some extent, justice for all. And so it's not for me to do a lot of work, but it's for me to encourage everyone else to do a bit of work by offering questions to the panel, who will introduce themselves, because I've only just met them, and I would be reluctant to mess it all up. So can I start? Shall I work down and then come to you? Okay. Is that okay? It's not that you're not. Yes, it's not
That's
that
fine, thank you.
making you last. It's just, I think I'm just trying to find a bit of order here. So can I come to you first?
You can indeed.
Please.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm a surprise panellist. I was a member of the audience until 5 minutes ago. But Dr. Craissati, I'm actually one of the independent governors on the board of the University of East London. But in my day job, I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist, and I suppose of particular relevance to this evening, I work as an independent expert with some of the most complicated and long-serving prisoners who committed particularly serious offences.
Why don't you do it?
Well, goodness me. There's the short answer, and the short answer is that forensic psychology is the most fantastic integration of kind of intellectually demanding subject, but at the same time the most kind of compelling connection with people who have sort of reached the edges of what we would think of as behaviour that we can imagine, I suppose.
Do you recognise when Theo was talking about the hope through pain? Have you ever got to that point with your clients, are they?
Well, I think I think one of the things that isn't ever talked about publicly is how almost impossible it is for someone who's committed a really heinous offence, killing a child or something, the worst offence, how impossibly difficult it is for them to face up to it. So I would say, that struggle through a long sentence of someone trying to acknowledge what they did is pretty slow and painful. So, I mean, I absolutely do recognise that.
Okay. Fitzroy, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, and good evening. I know there's a lot of familiar faces in the audience. For those that don't know me, my name is Fitzroy Andrew. I'm part of the team here that has been referred to as the Office for Institutional Equity. So one of the things I guess I will talk about, my boss is on the screen here, so they will have as much, if not more, to say than me. I'm interested in pain because I think that making sense of this concept of equity in an institutional setting like this one means engaging with pain, and there are pains of different kinds. There is the pain that is associated with, if you like, the memory of racism. There is the pain that is associated with the fear of racism, which I think is manifested in an institution like this. So I was really struck by a lot of what Theo said, be interested to engage with you on that. The other word that I'd like to introduce, which I think is a form of power that is relevant, that is often conflated with race, is culture. Now that's culture both in the, if you like, quote, ethnic sense, but it's also culture in the sense of how an institution works as well. And I think that interacts with the notion of pain and so on as well. So I think there's so much real kind of rich territory for discussion that's been opened up. So but good to be here and looking forward to the next 25 minutes or so.
Theo, we've heard quite enough.
Yeah.
I don't mean
I like your
don't
truth.
want to hear more. Can I? Yes. I'm reluctant to pronounce your name yet because I think it looks like Juozas. Is that right?
Close enough. So it's silent J, Juozas. My name is Juozas Kelecius. I'm a project coordinator for Restorative Justice Organization, as well as I'm a trainee probation officer, and I wrote a case study for Dr. Gavrielides' book, Power, Race, and Justice, that dialogue, the restorative dialogue that we will not have. That's
What was the case study?
The case study was on the power of children's sexuality.
This is part of it's a huge chunk of work focused on race and race inequality. And one of the main points that I'm making in the book is that when you first hear about restorative justice, you expect the first thing that you expect is to provide an alternative for those who are let down the most by the criminal justice system. And the other representation of black and minority ethnic groups in the criminal justice system, they don't need any discussion. The evidences are out there. It hasn't changed. It's actually gone worse. So you would expect that restorative justice would most.
So it's better if you just don't look back at me. Look forward, and then I can. It's best to look forward, and then I can see you and read your lips. I can't hear you. I'm here. You can't see me, but I can see you.
Because I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at that.
I couldn't hear.
You're not restorative justice. You have to look at you. So anyway, and yet it's not serving those groups. It went into and Many have criticised restorative justice for not doing that, and I bring that to the fourth to say, well, actually, if restorative justice is going to be provided in these two different funnels, the structured and the unstructured, that we've got to not forget those who are let down the most by the structured way of delivering justice and provide the alternative. And this is where the two funnels in the model of consensual justice comes in, and how those imbalances that exist both within those systems, the structured and the unstructured system, must be controlled. Because when you look at how cases have been delivered with race, hate crimes and so on, both within those systems, the power structure still exists. So it's how you address those imbalances in both systems, and this is what the book is all about. So that's point number one, and I'm unpacking why the word race is in there. The second reason, which is equally important, is because I want to move on, not to move on, that's the wrong word. We can never move on. I want to progress the dialogue that we're having in silos, whether it's the race equality silo, the disability silo, the sexual orientation silo, the gender silo, whatever silos we're having. And through the realizations that I highlighted and the issue of power abuse, which then leads to inequality, is the common denominator for all those different discussions that are taking place because of those levers that I talked about, one of which is the grouping of victimization and feeling that we have to protect our turf, we have to protect our, whatever we signed up for, and helping us to understand that if we are going to break down those barriers and move on with the power imbalances, we've got to break down the silos. So these are the two reasons why, and there's a lot more, but these are the two main reasons that the word race is highlighted in there, but also because of the work that I've been doing, which is closer to race equality as opposed to disability and all the other equality strands. And I just felt I had to challenge what I know best.
So sorry, just one addition to my understanding of what you're saying is that your work is grounded in the present rather than the historical injustices done. So you're looking at the present. So you're looking at the criminal justice system, and then you're comparing it to perhaps a community justice or a restorative justice system. So it's only looking at the here and now, because you said at the beginning that being in the present, you never look back, you've been in the present. But that, I would say to you that you have the privilege to be in the present, because there are others who are impacted by 500 years of history.
Yeah, and I think, well, you've got two different things that you can look at it as there is a race case now that we need to deal with, but if you deny the trauma that comes with it, whether it's the cultural trauma or the realities of a cultural institution or everything that comes with it, if you deny that, then what I described as the constructive pain that you must feel in the presence of that trauma, then you really don't have a chance to actually engaging with restorative justice or the form of equity that I was talking about. So I'm not distinguishing the two. I think the two go together. And as I said, if we don't have those honest dialogues, and I'm not pretending to, as I said in the book, I come from a privileged position in the sense that I look the way I look, I sound the way I sound, all the characteristics that we all have, and I accept all those things by default. So I have moved on from those, and I'm sure I'll be characterized as ABC, and I have been in the past, but I'm not afraid of that discussion, because we all have to accept those realities and deal with those realities if this dialogue that we won't have is going to take place, is the dialogue that we will not have. And I never felt that I could have it while I was being part of the race equality movement, and that's why we all need to accept those realities, but not deny them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Buber.
Thank you.
Can I offer up the opportunity amongst you all to offer questions? You only have to stick your hand up, and then the microphone, the microphone can be passed? Yes,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Verity Brown, psychology professor. So my question, I think it's related to Bugi's point, actually, and I'm thinking about your two funnels. And in the funnel on the left side, we've got a crime and a victim and a harmed person and a criminal. But the funnel on the other has harmed people, and those harmed people could have been harmed even without a crime. And I think, so the context of harm. So how does restorative justice that requires pain in the context of race then? And so if you take the crime out of the funnel and you just left there, I mean, is this about facing white privilege and feeling that pain and all of those things? Is that part of your thing?
Yeah, and again, there is a misunderstanding of what restorative justice is, and usually you would think of it as mediation or a specific type of practice. But as I said, for me, it's a lot more than that, and I'm not the only person who claims that. It is what we allow ourselves to engage with, first of all with ourselves, and then the other person or the other group of people. And that might be in the form of a dialogue or in the form of negotiation of our own power and the pain that we're creating consciously or subconsciously, us and the likes. So for me, it's not, well, if you look at the second panel about the harmed people and the harmed parties, you don't necessarily need what you have in the other case, where it's a specific type of case, which also might have the same reasons that led to that outcome, the discrimination, the whatever you're feeling, the same feelings, but it's a different kind of pain, it's a different kind of experience. And one doesn't mean that it's more important than the other, or that because one exists, the other doesn't exist. It's just two forms of delivering what we call justice and fairness. And the two ways of emptying that funnel doesn't take away the other way. And that's where people, I think in the past, when we're talking about criminal justice and restorative justice, they would always put them in opposition. It was either or. And people were feeling, oh, it's going to replace the criminal justice system. How can it replace the criminal justice system? And the conversation just went down the wrong way. For me, it's not about that. The pain is the same. The action has taken place in a structured criminal justice system, but it has also taken place in an informal setting. And it's how you can provide justice and fairness for both equity and justice without taking, away the other.
Can I intervene? Is the pain the same? I mean, Fitzroy, how deep can the pain go for someone on the issue of race?
Yeah, to some extent that speaks to the work that Bugge was referencing. So Juozas Kelecius talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome, the idea being that the pain that our ancestors experienced through Middle Passage and so on is passed down through generations, biologically, socially, psychologically, in all sorts of ways, so that what we, if I can use the royal we, experience as pain, trauma, is not just about our own direct experiences, it's also an inheritance as well. And that's why sometimes the trauma or the psychology of race as it affects those who experience discrimination can really be quite difficult to explain, because it's not just about what happens in the here and now. It's almost like it's something that you're born with, that is just there from where you're born. So to that extent, it is deep. But if you're trying to explain that in a way that somebody who has never experienced that can understand and act on in a restorative or any other way, that's a huge gulf conceptually to bridge. So that's the importance of the conversation that we're having this evening, because to make sense of racial justice, which is where I got the relevance of what you're talking about today, that's a necessary conversation.
But is everyone carrying this pain or not?
I would say that you can, this is sounding awfully medical, but I'll go with it, stay with me. You can relieve some of the pain. A simple anecdote. I have a memory of being, 30 years ago I worked in the NHS. I was an HR director. And I remember an occasion where I'd been at a meeting all day and there was a social gathering of all of my peers. And I was the only person who looked like me amongst my peer group. And I looked at this room and thought, I really don't want to go in there. because I didn't want to have to experience that discomfort of being the only person like me in the room at that time. There is no way in the world that I would behave in the same way today. And the reason for that is that because I've had to use the language, work on myself. I've had to understand what was the thinking, what were the feelings, how was I making sense of that situation at that time. And it comes back to, I think, something you said, Theo, about feeling okay about ourselves. So that's, for me, that's the key to it, which is why, again, what you said about individuals is so important. Okay,
Yes.
go ahead. Yeah,
Yes, we're on fire.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I'm sorry to... there's too many people in charge here, and you know what I'm like. So, please, you go first.
Yeah.
You go first. Lady with the glasses on, you can go second. And there is a chap right at the top there. He's third. And then you are fourth. Right, okay, well, you'll have to... After we've dealt with the fourth questionnaire, we will go online. How about that? Please, go ahead.
I'm Donna. Did my master's in psychology at UEL. I'm currently an intern in the Office of Institutional Equity. So my question really, to kind of move you along, is around the dialogue and the narrative. So here we are. The narratives around justice, equity, values in the public domain are so poor. When we have a leadership of this country that cannot face when there is an untruth or an injustice, where does restorative justice sit in the wider society, and how can we engage whatever it is, your program, your ideas, how can that be engaged so it's actually restorative justice in action?
Shall I deal with one question at a time? It's much easier that way.
Yes.
And people might feel they want to come back.
Yeah,
well.
that'd be great. And I think that's connected as well. So, I mean, in terms of the intergenerational pain and acknowledging that, and also the fact that we are dealing with, I mean, as I said, it's not by coincidence, what we're experiencing, the language we're using, the feelings that we have, the disadvantaged thinking, all those things that I talked about. I don't think they're just coincidences. They are serving a purpose. And that purpose also is the same purpose for not having this conversation, because when we do, and they're uncomfortable conversations, they're not easy to have, but I'm happy we're having them. And without conflict, without fire, you don't have creation. Fire is the root for creation. So to create fire, you have to have this kind of discussions. And you will never be able to address the pain that is being passed on if there is no public debate about it. And there is different forms of justice and restorative justice. It doesn't have to be in those 2-3 methods that we keep talking about. One example is the Truth and Reconciliation Committees that happen in Rwanda, in South Africa. Whether successful or not, whether they helped or not, Mandela helped to heal some of the pain. What happened in Rwanda helped to heal some of that pain. And it wasn't in the form of typical restorative justice, but it was community dialogue that helped, and it could happen. And that's a form of dialogue that communities must enforce, must ask for, but to ask for that dialogue and demand for that dialogue, like the same dialogue that students demanded when the fees were imposed. And they went down the streets for the first time, and I saw so many young people going down the streets because fees were being, increased. And they were like, well, how am I going to pay for this? That's the sort of dialogue that they wanted. Then they had conversation, dialogue with the universities. The same people who walked down the road when we went to war in Iraq, and all those people went down the streets and said, I don't want this on my land. That's the kind of dialogue that people would have. And the same dialogue that I said when the terrorist attack happened in Paris, and people marched down the road and talked about, this happened, but this is how I feel, and the victims took part of part of that demonstration. These are different types of dialogues. These are different types of restorative justice, if you like, that you ask those in power in a different way to engage in a dialogue, whether they want it or not. Now, whether they went far enough, that is a different question, right? And this is where restorative justice, I said, could be the potential biopower that then would counterbalance the power that is so structured and so ingrained that leads to certain outcomes over and over and over again. Why would you expect something to be different when the law is structured in a specific way? You know, it's done in a specific way and is structured for a specific purpose. And I'm giving this alternative, which I didn't create. It was there. It was the original way of delivering justice in the old communities, you know, in the ancient communities. If you look at how justice was delivered, it wasn't delivered by judges and lawyers. It was delivered by communities who had the power. And that's where I want to take it back. Whether it's within that structured justice system or the unstructured way, those dialogues need to happen if we are going to address the pain that is being passed on from one generation to another and another and another.
Can I bring you in? Restorative justice really about the individual, not about groups.
Well, I think you could come at it from different angles. I come at it from the individual angle. So I'm very focused on a single perpetrator and very aware of sometimes there's a victim, sometimes there isn't a victim, and that kind of... So I suppose I was thinking about this, to turn it into a question if I may, because obviously it's delightful hearing you. It's kind of coming at things from a different angle from me as a clinician, so really interesting. So I'm thinking about the role actually that media plays. You might have something to say here, but the media plays in kind of shaping the narrative that we're forced to have about perpetrators and victims. And so I see the pain of the victim who imagines that someone's going to be released by the parole board, who's living out, you know, a 30-year-old hideous memory. And of course I'm seeing a man, you know, in front of me who himself, of course, was dreadfully misused and abused, and so we can go on about it. But I suppose I'm just thinking the narrative is so very black and white that we're forced into, in a very punitive narrative that somehow the idea in my world of release being about denying the awfulness of the act. It must be about denying that. Anyway, so it's a bit of a long question, but I'm just interested in what you think about that kind of the role of media in shaping the narrative.
I'm sure. As the chair, I shouldn't be able to do that.
I'm smiling because I've got an entire chapter just on the representation of justice, particularly by the media and the courts, and how the images that are being portrayed, again, not by coincidence, I think someone is not doing it intentionally, but he's part of, like we're part of the same system for a specific purpose. And you know, we've got millions of examples of miscarriages of justice and representations of justice that, as I said, they're not true to the true form of justice as Aristotle described it, and as a virtue and as a value that we have, and when we close our eyes, have in our hearts and in our minds. And when you realize that, as a media representative or as a justice person, a lawyer or whatever, then you come in conflict with your own self and the role that you have in the society that you're serving, and start to ask questions. And if you're serving the criminal justice system and you're feeling that you're part of that, then you start to ask yourself, how do I become the hummingbird? What do I do, my little bit to do in the system that I'm part of, not to shake it, or, as I said, I'm not an abolitionist. I was having this debate 10 years ago with Angela Davis in a conference in America. It's more difficult to fix the prison than get rid of the prison. You can say, get rid of the prison, but how did you fix it? Because who is going to get rid of the prisons? There is no way you can get rid of the prisons right now. And I'm not going to live 1,000 years, I'm going to live a few years. So how do we improve the prison system? Not how do we get rid of the prison system? And that's where I'm coming from. I'm looking for a consensual way because isn't restorative justice about consensus? Isn't it about removing our hats and just coming down and sitting at the same table, not pretending that I'm better than you, and that we're all trying to address what we both need to address, which is the harm that we're experiencing?
Well, I hope you're not trying to get rid of the media. I don't think anyone was proposing that drastic action. And to pick up one point, I can't think of anything I have done that wasn't intentional. I wouldn't do that. Because that's lying then, and I've tried my damnedest through my career not to do that. But I take up a point about media. So I became quite close, or friendly is a difficult term, because I know it is friendly, but people might not think that. They might think there are ulterior motives to this. With one of John Warboy's victims, okay? And if it hadn't been for the media, Warboys would have been out. So there are positive roles that we play. They're not all. Yes, some of the language is dreadful. Some of the way things are presented are distorted. I accept that. And those individuals have to be accountable for that. But I would defend the media in general in what it tries to do. It's not perfect all the time, but without it, so many things would not have happened today that everyone would see as examples of real justice. They don't have to just be miscarriages, they just could even be an apology to all intents and purposes. They could all, there are so many David and Goliath stories out there, and and I've seen so many people say nothing would have happened if I hadn't gone to the media, in all sorts of respects. So there is a vital role, but I accept in your structure, I find it difficult to see where it goes, where it plays a role, where it has the role. But that's an interesting thing. Anyway, look, I'm trying to get. I know, and I didn't mean to get involved. Yes.
And then we will deal with those
Yes.
lines separately, because we have to go somewhere else.
Do we? All right.
Yes, we do. So just that, and people are
Okay. All right.
Sorry, can I very quick?
Well, can you just?
Because it's for the topic of what we had before about race, so I just wanna.
Can we come back to? Can I just get to these questions first? Yes. Sorry, you've been waiting so long. My apologies.
Very patiently, very patiently. Thank you. My name is Karine Min, and I work in the National Health Service here as a forensic psychiatrist and as a psychoanalyst. And one of the things I wanted to, well, apart from thanking Theo for a tour de force of an inaugural professorial lecture, thank you, I wanted to come back to something that Bugawa and Fitzroy had referred to about the 500 years and the slave trauma, and indeed other genocide traumas, and how important it is to look at the whole thing transgenerationally and what's happened. And some of you will know much more than I do about the epigenetic changes that we now know occur, which is why we inherit these things. I also wanted to say that as part of my training in medicine and psychiatry as a psychoanalyst, there was never anything about cultural matters, cultural differences, cultural awareness. And all the learning I had was from my black patients and people that I met in prison, far too many of whom were black, for structural racist reasons and so on. For the last year, I've been involved in preparing a report for the International Psychoanalytic Association on racism, and it was an absolute eye-opener to me, and it made me much more aware as a white person how we have to do the work to get equality and equity back. That was the first thing I wanted to say, and very briefly I wanted to come back to the word pain, and what Theo had also been referring to in that circle at the prison that he visited, because I do some group therapy in prisons, And lots of what you described could be extrapolated back to the kind of group therapeutic work that we do in the prisons, where, in a sense, the aim is to help the people develop insight, which can be very difficult, and eventually, light years down the line, perhaps remorse. And with that comes depressive breakdowns and real painful suffering, because their own victimizations and their own perpetrations, if there is such a word, has to be then acknowledged and worked through. It's a very difficult process, and several patients at the outpatient clinic where we see ex-prisoners, ex-high secure patients, they want to rename the Portman Clinic the Sadness Clinic, because they come expecting to be made happy and get as far away from what they've done and made others suffer and their own suffering, and then they realize that we actually have them to be sad, because that is part of life.
Is there a question?
No, sorry, I forgot.
That's fine.
I forgot
Can
my
I move on to
question.
the chat at the No, that's fine. I just didn't want to move on without making sure.
Thank you. My name is Nick Johnson, and full disclosure, I'm the chair of Restorative Justice for All, so I'm maybe slightly biased. I thought it was a fascinating presentation, Theo. The one thing which really stuck in my mind was when you talked about the need to break down silos, particularly the silos of the victim and the perpetrator. I found that particularly intriguing, because you could argue that at the heart of restorative justice is the victim and the perpetrator, and if you don't have those labels, what do you have?
Yes? Do you want to answer that, and then I'll go to Juozas?
Okay, I'll try and do as quick as I can. Point about the media, very important. As I said, we all have power. It's just how we use that power. So if you use it constructively, then it will be a good tool. If you use it in a different way to manifest power, it will not be a good tool. I'll very quickly give you an example of how you can use the media to achieve justice, and it was a very personal experience, and I only just concluded now, and I had to resort to good journalism and the media to get my justice. Fun enough, me. Yeah. So back in June, I made a mistake, and I made a transfer of £5,000 into the wrong account. Okay, it was the same branch code, the same branch, HSBC. This became a big news in the media. Yeah. HSBC, same branch, but it was a different account because I put 2 digits incorrectly, and it went to the wrong person. Phone HSBC. I don't know if you know HSBC, but I went on phone and stayed on the line for hours and hours and hours. And they promised, they have a policy where they would send the funds back within 48 hours. Days passed, that never happened, and I spent hours accumulating and phoning. They managed to say, okay, we'll find the person, we know who it is, he's a customer, and he has accepted the money is not his money, and he's going to put it back on the 15th of July. That never happened. When I put a complaint, HSBC came back and they said, do you know what, we tried everything, there's nothing we can do, you're not going to get your money back, goodbye, have a good life, here's £30 compensation. And that's when I got, you're joking. I went to the Metropolitan Police, reported it as a crime, and then they took it from there. One thing led to another. HSBC was refusing to give the details of the person to the police until the police, had to take them to Crown Court and all that sort of things, present as witnesses and all that sort of thing. Anyway, in the end, they gave the name. So on the Sunday, they phoned me and they said, we've got the name now, and on Monday, we're going to take the individual to their branch and ask them to put the money, otherwise we will arrest them in the branch with HSBC. Monday morning, branch manager phones me to say, I've got 3 police officers here, I don't know what's going on, can you just tell me what's going on? It's like, well, it's been going on for months, it's been 4 months, you haven't done anything. Cut the long story short, within 2 days, our money was returned. We found out that the client had asked the police, to the HSBC, to take the money when there were funds in their account, and they never did, right? Conclusion, we got the money, but I never got my justice. And I never got my justice, and my only way to get justice was to go to the media and tell my story. Why did I want to tell my story and approach a good journalist to do without twisting it? Because I felt I'm not the only little charity that I knew how to fight the system because I could have said, that's it, they're not going to give me my money back. I'm a little charity, I'm never going to get my £5,000. So I give up because HSBC told me so. And my only way to tell other organizations that you can do better, you can claim your rights, was to go to the media. Yeah, that was the injustice that I couldn't address. And I could only find a way by going to a good journalist and say, you've got a story here and you've got to tell people that there is justice if you pursue justice in this way. Don't be afraid of the power of the big guys. And that's an example.
There's more conversation to be had. I want us to have.
You want us to
and I need
All right.
to take you to the next stage for our
Eustace, I will come to you after we've been to this chap who's sitting so patiently, the most patient person in the entire audience.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm
thank
sorry
you.
it's taken so long.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Theo, for this wonderful lecture. I'm Emmanuel Quay, Law International Relations. What I'm getting is we're having this dialogue because it has within itself the organic nature to, it has this organic power in itself to hopefully facilitate justice. There's a lot of self or inner healing going around now. Everywhere you go, there's inner healing. People want healing. Is this the hope that restorative justice is in its own way trying to bring about inner healing? Because when we talk about justice, what you just described right now, was it the sort of healing you wanted? Is that why you went to the media? Although you had your money back, was it the inner healing? When we talk about race, there are people of color wanting this inner healing. When you talk about the criminal in Canada, even though he's a white man or whatever, was it the inner healing? Now, the thing about inner healing as well is perpetrators of, should I say, crime or harm or whatever, want some sort of healing. Victims also want healing. So, are we having a dialogue for those who have abused power to come to the realization of where they can have their own inner healing from? Or are we going to say that because I'm a victim, he doesn't deserve inner healing because he perpetrated something? Why should he have healing? And is that why probably things are a bit mired with what we want to achieve? Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm going to answer all those points together, and it comes to one word, which is responsibility. That's why I feel so passionate about saying the right things about restorative justice. And it is about inner healing as well. It is about trauma. It is about addressing a number of psychological, but also factual issues. And I'm just going to use again case studies, because I think that's where people kind of understand what I'm trying to say and the reality of life. And it was 8 years of cases that I was looking at of child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. It wasn't in this country, it was in the US. And I was evaluating cases that were dealt with through the restorative justice route, that were diverting them from the criminal justice system. And one case involved somebody who had been sexually abused as a boy, and he was an adult, and they had agreed to meet with the priest, who was obviously in an advanced age, and they agreed to do that. And they had the meetings, which were considered to be successful. Okay, and a couple of years later, that particular person committed suicide. And I was part of that assessment, which, as I said, was considered to be a successful conclusion, right? And I don't know if you're aware of these cases, but they cost millions and millions and millions of pounds to the institution. Why am I saying this case? Because on this occasion, in restorative justice, you might have the practitioner who knows how to implement restorative justice is not supported by the right professionals who will be from the psychology departments and the psychotherapy departments and the therapist departments and all those sort of things that I'm not part of. I'm a restorative justice practitioner, and this is where people need to work together, because it's a continuum of service. You cannot open the Pandora box and just close it and move on. Restorative justice entails pain, constructive pain that will lead to healing and outcomes that you cannot achieve in the way that we're delivering justice, which is the sausage machine, as I call it, way that moves on very quickly and doesn't leave enough room and time for this pain to be experienced. If you are going to open that Pandora box for whatever purpose, to heal and to progress and to address inequalities and trauma, you've got to be prepared for what you're going to face.
Okay. I'd like some applause for the panel who've worked remarkably well. And Theo, I wish you all the success with your book. I have one more question. How will this book help Yorkshire Cricket Club?
Thank you very much.